Oh hi, and welcome to SABnessful, where I give my opinions that no one really cares about, but will give anyways. Today, I'll be looking at the 2022 film Thor: Love and Thunder, which disappointed people in a lot of ways, so I'm going to try to take a strike at improving it. Real quick, if you're feeling ever so kind, please make sure to caress that subscribe button to help my channel grow, and you can also leave a like and a comment that could really help with my engagement algorithm. I could really use it right now, but that's okay, you don't have to if you don't want to. I mean, it's up to you, but if you really want to. Enough said, let's bifrost into Thor: Love and Thunder. The film opens meeting our villain-to-be Gore and his unnamed daughter wandering the desert. After his daughter passes away, he starts hearing a voice beckoning him. He follows the voice to an oasis where he meets the god he's been looking for, Rapu. Gore begs Rapu for help, who just laughs in his face, but is kind enough to give us some exposition.
What we're celebrating is a fresh kill.
We just vanquished the holder of the Necro Sword before he could harm any other gods with that cursed blade.
He threatened to end my entire empire.
Rapu then strangles Gore, but the Necro Sword appears in Gore's hand, which gives him visions of the Bifrost and something called Eternity, and he uses the sword to kill Rapu. With the sword infecting and becoming a part of him, Gore vows that all gods will die. Moving on, we get narration about our protagonist Thor, recapping the audience about his previous relationship with Jane, all the people he's lost, and how many times his brother has died. We then see him with the Guardians of the Galaxy, though don't get too excited to see them because they won't be around for long. Oh, and Korg's there too. They're in battle trying to protect a sacred temple, and Thor uses his powers to defeat the enemy by destroying the sacred temple. After this, we go to Jane Foster receiving chemotherapy, and while talking to her friend Darcy, we learn she has stage 4 cancer. Later on, we see Jane in her lab taking blood samples.
The results are still coming back the same. I'm afraid the chemo's very little effect. I'm so sorry, Jane.
While doing research, something beckons her. There's a lot of beckoning in this film. To look at this book and read some words that give her an idea. We then go to New Asgard, because old Asgard was destroyed by Hela, and we see Jane looking at the pieces of Thor's hammer, because Mjolnir got destroyed by Hela. She gets closer to it and things start happening. Ooh, is Jane worthy? No, but we'll get there. Back with Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy, they receive a bunch of distress calls about someone called the God Butcherer, and see a bunch of slain gods. Thor recognizes one of the calls is his friend Sif, and he decides to go find her with Korg while the Guardians go handle some of the other distress calls, leaving the film and destroying everyone's hopes of a film with Thor and the Guardians team up. With his axe, Thor uses the Bifrost to bring him, Korg, and the goats that were gifted to him to where Sif is. They arrive and see an injured Sif, who tells Thor about the God Butcherer. That's Gore, by the way. And that he's on his way to New Asgard. Cut to New Asgard, where we see Gore summoning shadow monsters to attack the town, which leads to a battle. Thor and Korg show up to help out, but oh, what was that? During the battle, Thor sees his hammer and follows it to its new wielder, who is none other than Jane, aka Mighty Thor. Wait, so is Thor now more of a title rather than a name like agent or detective? Why not? Oh, whatever. Anyways, them reuniting prompts more narration where we see their relationship deteriorate due to them both fearing losing each other and them being too busy saving the world to maintain their relationship. And then we get this little tidbit.
I need you to promise me you'll always protect her. And I love you too, buddy.
And love that deep has a way of becoming magical.
So this implies then that Jane can only wield the hammer because Thor asked it to protect her rather than her just be worthy of it, which just kind of feels like a cop-out to me. And does this mean Thor can just ask his hammer to let it be used by others? Also, if Jane can use the hammer after it was destroyed, why couldn't Thor— oh, whatever. Back to the battle. Thor fights with Gore, and with Jane and Valkyrie joining in, Gore decides to flee but uses his shadow abilities to take all the children. Was this bitch seriously sleeping while this whole battle was going on? The next day, while Thor, Jane, Korg, and Valkyrie talk about what to do, Axel, who was one of the kids kidnapped and this guy's son, uses his abilities to find Thor and show him where he and the other kids are, which Thor recognizes as the Shadow Realm. Also, real quick, want to mention that while wielding the hammer's powers, Jane's body is a lot stronger, but when she's not, she reverts back to her body that's weakened by her cancer. Realizing they need reinforcements, and since the Necrosword has the ability to kill gods, they decide to go to Omnipotent City. I'm going to really struggle to keep saying that right. I'll literally never say it correctly. Home to the major deities of a parliament of pantheons overseen by Zeus to recruit a god army. They grab disguises and sneak into a meeting being run by Zeus.
I hereby open this holy council of the gods, where we have many serious matter to be talked about, such as Where are we going to hold this year's orgy?
Disney let that in? Anyways, they quickly realize that the gods are not likely to help and plan to steal Zeus's lightning bolt. Why does that sound oddly familiar? Before they do this, Thor tries to talk to Zeus but is humiliated by him. Zeus then admits to Thor privately that he's scared since Gorr could kill him with a necrosword, and Thor needs to stop talking about him since it'll cause a panic. And then Zeus mentions another plot device.
Do not worry. The god Butcher, he will not reach eternity.
What does he mean, reach eternity?
Eternity is a very powerful being at the center of the universe. It will grant the desire of the first person who reaches it.
This basically means that Gorr could kill all the gods with one wish. But Zeus says Gorr doesn't have the key. That said, why has literally no one else already found eternity? You're telling me not a single one of these gods wouldn't want that power? Or at the very least make a wish so that someone couldn't use it against them? It just feels contrived to me. Anyway, Zeus won't let Thor leave since he knows where the city is, which prompts the group to attack. Zeus uses his bolt to kill Korg, but don't worry, this is Marvel, so he's not actually dead. Zeus then fires at Thor, but Thor is able to catch his bolt and throw it back at Zeus to kill him. But don't worry, this is Marvel, so he's not actually dead. They then escape the city and head towards the Shadow Realm. While en route, Thor opens up to Jane.
I pushed people away, kept them at a distance because of the fear of that loss, but I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to live like that.
Close off your heart and feel the pain.
That's what I did. I want to live in the moment. I want to live like there's no tomorrow, throw caution to the wind. I want to be with you, Jane. What do you say?
I have cancer.
Jane then tells him she heard Mjolnir calling to her, and she was hoping that since science wasn't working, Viking magic would be able to cure her.
Mjolnir chose you. And it chose you because you're worthy. And that's something.
Well, that's not actually quite the case because we saw... oh, whatever. Anyways, Thor tells Jane it was her that made him worthy enough to wield Mjolnir, and whatever she wants to do, they'll do together. And she tells him she wants to finish the mission, and they get back together. What a touching moment, which doesn't last long since they arrive at the Shadow Realm. Or so they think.
They're not here.
Where are they?
Wait, hold on, wouldn't you know, Thor, this isn't the right location? You saw where the kids were and it wasn't black and white, so why are you even still here? Oh, you know what? I just need to stop overthinking everything. Anyways, while investigating the area, Jane finds papers conveniently showing her that the key is Thor's axe.
It's a trap!
Wow, really? Never would have guessed. Anyways, Gorr uses his abilities to catch all three of them, and Gorr gives Thor a choice. Call his axe, or watch Jane and Valkyrie die. Thor says bet and calls his axe, freeing all of them. They fight, but Valkyrie is injured, leading Thor to open the Bifrost to get them out of there. But Gorr is able to grab his axe before it closes. Jane and Valkyrie are then both taken to the hospital. While there, Thor tells Jane that every time she uses the hammer, it drains her mortal strength, which is preventing her body from fighting off the cancer. Jane tells Thor she wants to keep fighting, but he says if she uses the hammer one more time, it could kill her. He pleads with her to stay so they can figure this out together, and she reluctantly agrees. With Jane and Valkyrie unable to fight, Thor heads to Gorr on his own. Meanwhile, Gorr uses the axe to open the gate to eternity, and this time Thor is able to find the right place with no difficulties. Gorr creates shadow monsters, Thor lends the kids his power, and a battle breaks out. The kids are able to handle the shadow monsters, but Thor is losing to Gorr, which Jane is able to sense, prompting her to arrive and help him. Jane fights Gorr, and Thor tries to stop the gates from opening.
I knew you could do it.
No, I can't hold back. What do you mean you knew it could do it? The portal still opened. You stopped nothing. Anyways, Thor sends the kids back, and Jane destroys the necrosword. However, Gorr is able to get into the gate. Thor tries to talk Gorr out of it, telling him he could bring his daughter back. Thor then goes to comfort Jane. Okay, sweet gesture, but like, could you at least stop Gorr first? Which is the reason why Jane sacrifices herself? That's a huge risk to let Gorr make a wish. But Thor must realize he's in a Marvel movie, so Gorr doesn't wish to kill all the gods, and instead brings his daughter back to life. With her strength depleted, Jane passes away. But don't worry, this is a Marvel. Oh wait, Jane is actually staying dead? Oh. Aw. With the Necrosword destroyed, Gore's life force also drains, and he asks Thor to look after his daughter right before he passes away. We then get narration checking in on the surviving characters. Valkyrie and Sif are training the kids, Korg makes a child with Dwayne The Rock, lucky, and Thor takes care of Gore's daughter, aka Love. The film ends with the two heading into battle together. But wait, this is Marvel, so we got end credit scenes. The first one shows us that Zeus is still alive, and he tells his son Hercules to make the mortals fear them again. The second one shows us that Jane arrives in Valhalla since she died while battling her cancer. And that's Thor Love and Thunder. Now on to my likes, which yes, there are things I do like. I'll actually start with my favorite character, which is Jane. Her storyline is by far the best one. It was the most complex, and I thought it was interesting how her becoming a hero and saving people was in turn killing her. I like the way they showed her trying to come to terms with having cancer, and any scene that showed us this was the most emotionally impactful. My favorite parts of the whole film is when she destroys the sink. There's no dialogue, just music score, but you can tell exactly what she is thinking. And in a film where so much is told to us, it was nice to have a moment where emotions are shown to us. Another great show not tell moment is when Jane shows up to aid Thor in fighting Gore, and they look at each other. There's no dialogue, but you can tell exactly what they're both thinking. That was done well. I also liked the idea of Gore wanting to kill the gods because they're horrible to their supporters. I think there was a lot that could have been done with that, but instead he just quickly becomes a classic evil villain with no nuance, which can be refreshing since we've been saturated with so many sympathetic villains, but you can still have nuance with a classic evil villain. Let's see, what else do I like? Oh, I like the Shadow Realm, the one that's black and white. I thought that was a neat visual, and I like the added detail of color coming from the bolt and the hammer, and the humor was, for the most part, pretty good. My favorite running joke was Stormbreaker being jealous of Mjolnir and the bolt. That was funny, though I do think at times there was too much humor. Not every scene needs a comedic moment. I also did like that they made Jane arrive in Valhalla because she did in fact die in battle. I thought that was a nice touch. Moving on to my dislikes. Buckle up. Where do I even start? I guess I'll start with my biggest issue. I believe there is too much going on in this film. There are way too many storylines. You start with Gore's storyline about killing the gods. That was fine, love the concept. You have the tease of Thor with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Makes sense, that's where Thor was last time we saw him, and his arc this season is finding himself. Got it. And you have Jane's storyline, the best one. But then comes the children's storyline. Oh my Odin, I hated this one, but I'll get into that in a minute. Whatever, a kidnapping storyline. But then there's the Omnipotent City one. Okay, that's a lot to throw in, but got it. And then the Eternal Wish storyline. What? And Thor's axe is the key. Huh? There's just too many pieces being added and they just kept getting worse and worse and worse. Let's get into it. The children's storyline. Hated it. I felt it was so contrived. You're telling me Gore could take out all these gods but not Thor? Plot armor much? And sure, Thor had help, but we can see through the distress calls the other gods weren't alone either. And sure, there's the argument that Thor is just a lot stronger than the gods Gore killed, but it just seems such a stretch that he could kill those other gods but had to kidnap children to lure in Thor to kill him. This would have actually made sense if Gore needed Thor alive in order to open the gates since his axe is the key, but he didn't need Thor alive, he just needed the axe, so the trap was so extra. Continuing with the kids, hated that they joined the final battle. Not only is the CGI bad here, which the CGI has already been trashed a lot, so no need to do it here, but narratively it is so random, especially since there are still Asgardian warriors Thor could have brought with him to fight instead of the kids. They're right there. And the idea of untrained kids being able to hold their own against shadow monsters is stupid, and yes, I know Thor powered them up, but that's such a cop-out, it's too easy. Going on to the Omnipotent City section, I again like the idea, I thought it was cool, but if you're not going to take the time to fully flesh it out, then why show us? I actually thought this distracted away from the main story, which is the God Butcherer. I found it so unnecessary and didn't really contribute to the story at all. The time taken for that could have been better used somewhere else. And I know this was put in to set up a future film or show with Hercules, but it's honestly quite annoying how every freaking MCU film has a side story specifically to set up a future film, especially when that takes away from the main story. Moving on to the Eternity storyline, I already mentioned this, but it's very plot devicey to me. I just didn't think it was necessary, this whole he can destroy the universe with one move. This trope is also very repetitive in a lot of the MCU films, and I'm really tired of seeing it. Not everything has to be universe shattering. Now, it's been a while since I've watched the other Thor films, so maybe a lot of the things that were confusing were explained in them. I was just too lazy to rewatch them. I've also never read the comics, so I'm sure if I had, I would have understood a lot more of what's going on. And it's possible everything that happened in the film is what happened in the comics, which is why we got so much. But I don't care. As a viewer, I shouldn't have to read the comics to understand what's going on in the film. and all my opinions are solely based on the film. Perhaps all the storylines were better fleshed out in the comics. That is possible, but in the film, it just didn't work for me, and so much was unexplained. Which, funny enough, there is one thing that was explained that I didn't like, which was that Jane could use the hammer because Thor told her to protect her. Just make it because she's worthy, okay? Let's not bend the rules of the hammer here. I also really didn't like how they made Thor such a big buffoon, which he kind of has always been, but they really leaned into that here. And there was just so much unnecessary humor, like Zeus just twirling his bolt for so long. What is this even doing for the story? Using up time, that's what. Moving on to my least favorite character, which is Gorr. I feel like there is so much potential with him and they did nothing with it. They just made him extra and maniacal, like him teasing the kids. Why not have him try to manipulate them, convince them they shouldn't look up to their gods? And yes, he does bring it up, but it's to mock them, not try to convince them. He could have done the same thing when he had Valkyrie tied up and brought up the gods failing her when her family was slaughtered. He could have been trying to convince her to see his viewpoint. Instead, he's just mocking her. And yes, I understand the Necrosword infected him and made him evil, but that's a cop-out. It would have been more interesting if everything was of his own accord and the sword just gave him the ability to carry out his desires. Missed opportunities there, which brings me to my how I changed section. If I gave myself complete creative control, I would make Jane the main character. And I know most people wanted a Thor and Guardians team up, but I think that was never going to happen, so I'm not even going to humor it here. Anyways, back to Jane. Her storyline is the most complex and emotional one, and I think it would have been interesting seeing the first time she uses Mighty Thor and figuring out how to use the hammer, all the while dealing with the balance of becoming a superhero at the cost of her mortal life. I still have Thor in as a secondary character and the God Butcher as the villain, who's a great contrast to Jane. They are both infected with something that's taking over them, but Jane fights back while Gorr lets it consume him. I also like this idea of faith being a running theme. Jane's a scientist who doesn't really believe in faith, but towards the end she finds faith in those around her, while Gorr had faith in the beginning but lost it and mocks those who still have it. They basically start at two ends of the spectrum and they would end somewhere in the middle, and I make the story just about them. No omnipotent city, no eternal thing, no kids getting kidnapped. But I can't do that. As always, there are restrictions I must give myself, especially since artists rarely have full creative control when it comes to big studio films. It's clear Marvel, aka Disney, wanted to set up a future storyline with Hercules and Love being brought back through eternity. So I can't completely cut them, I had to make the storylines work. And because Thor is more marketable, I have to keep him as the protagonist, even though I think Jane would narratively be a more interesting one. That said, I am cutting the kidnapping storyline. Hated it, and now I can use that time somewhere else. Plus, now we don't need that terrible CGI. And I won't go over every instance, but I would trim out a lot of the comedic moments since there's just too many. As always, any scenes I don't mention are staying the same. Now, my objectives for my changes are: 1. Make Gorr more of a complex character and not be so black and white, figuratively. In general, I'm actually going to try and make a lot of the characters more complex, you'll see. 2. I want to really play more with Gorr having good points about killing the gods, but still going too far and making him a villain. And 3. Give better explanations for certain things, like why Thor's axe is the gate, and in general, just not have things feel so contrived. Enough said. This is how I changed Thor, Love, and Thunder. We're going to start with Jane and Thor flashback. I'm going to cut the parts where Thor asks the hammer to protect Jane, since I'm just going to have her be worthy to wield it. Fast forward more to Gorr and Thor fighting. At one point, Gorr touches Thor and he gets visions telling him how Thor's axe works. Eventually, Gorr is cornered by Thor, Jane, and Valkyrie. We see him eye Valkyrie and retreat away, but tells them he'll be back, and takes no kids. The next day, the group talks about their plans. With Gorr killing the gods, Jane and Valkyrie realize Thor is in danger and want to protect him, as well as make sure Gorr doesn't come back to New Asgard, so they decide to all team up. Since Gorr retreated, they believe they can take him on their own, thinking he fled because Jane and Valkyrie came to Thor's aid. Any mention of Omnipotent City in this scene I'm cutting, but I'll bring it up later. I'll then have Thor and Korg trying to find Gorr's location while Jane and Valkyrie ready the ship for transport. And of course, I'm keeping that sink scene. Thor and Korg are able to find Gorr, which, how did they do this? Viking magic. If Sif could find Gorr, I'm sure Thor can. That, or they could get a call from Quill saying there's a distress call coming from some planet. Let's call it Nor. Yeah. That works. And he thinks the God Butcher is there, but the Guardians are too busy to help. With Gorr found, they head to planet Nor. Cut to planet Nor, we see Gorr battling two gods in some type of temple where many supporters are chained up. He easily kills the gods and releases the supporters, telling them they're free and don't have to worship anyone ever again. The supporters start leaving the temple as Thor and co arrive. They see the two slain gods, as well as the supporters leaving their chains, taking in the horror around them, which particularly strikes a chord with Valkyrie. Gorr gestures to the chains, telling them that's what gods do to their his supporters, which is why he won't stop until they're wiped out. Realizing that Gore just freed all these people, they soften up just a little bit. Thor tries talking to Gore, telling him just because some gods are bad doesn't mean he should kill all of them. Gore retorts saying something about how those regarded in such high power are never truly innocent. Yes, I stole that from working. And that people are more free when they're not following others. Realizing talking is not working, the group decides to fight and Gore laughs at them, telling them that not even an army of gods could stop him. Things don't go well as Korg, Valkyrie, and Jane struggle to hold off the shadow monsters. Meanwhile, Thor isn't doing too bad against Gore, who isn't fighting as aggressively as he did last time, something that Valkyrie notices. The shadow monsters start closing in, especially around Jane, who starts getting tangled up by them. Thor sees this and panics. He opens the Bifrost and brings them all back to New Asgard, preventing anyone from getting hurt. However, as they leave, Thor catches Gore smiling and disappearing into the shadows. Back in New Asgard, Jane is upset and she questions why he brought them back. He tells her she looked to be in danger and couldn't help her since he was too preoccupied with Gore, so he got them out of there. Jane fires back saying she doesn't need help and was fine. Korg then chimes in saying Thor was right to bring them back. They were too overwhelmed, which Valkyrie reluctantly agrees to. By the way, a bit random, but I didn't know where else to mention it. For the next couple scenes, I'll add in shots highlighting Thor's shadow. That'll make sense later. Now, realizing they can't take Gore on their own, Thor says something like, "If it's an army of gods he wants, it's an army he gets." And this is where they decide to go to Omnipotent City to get stronger reinforcements. I'm actually going to have the rest of the film take place here so that there's less going on. It's a cool location, so I think it'd be interesting to explore more of it and see more of the gods. And we'll just assume the CGI is good. This also means that every scene after they visit the city is cut, but I'll be reincorporating what happens in those scenes later. While in the city, I'll have them split up to talk one-on-one with various gods trying to recruit them. I'll have Thor, Jane, and Valkyrie be unsuccessful with the gods they talk to, some being too scared or some not caring. One of the gods Valkyrie talks to laughs in her face and asks why they help someone like her, once again striking a chord within her. Though I'll have Gorg seem to go somewhere with the god he's talking to, which is his own god, Nini of the Noni. I just love saying that. They then all go to the meeting Zeus is holding, and I'll have this mostly play out the same, though I'll trim some of the theatrics to steal myself more time. And yes, the orgy stuff is staying, still surprised that made its way into the film. Fast forward to when Zeus confesses to Thor that he's scared. I liked this moment from Zeus, I thought it was interesting, so I wanted to play with that more. I'll have Zeus tell Thor privately that he knows he's been walking around the city trying to recruit gods, and tell Thor he's starting to cause a panic. He confesses to Thor that Gore and the Necrosword is a lot stronger than most gods realize, and it's better for them to stay in the city where it's safe. He then tells Thor that of all gods, he should stay since his axe is able to use the Bifrost, meaning that if Gore gets it, he could go to eternity. This part I'm adding is very talky-talky, which I don't like, but I wanted to explain why the axe is the key and how Gore knows. The impression from what's originally there is that the axe is the only key, but I'm not making that the case. And with Zeus telling Thor about the axe, it lets us, the audience, know that the way to get to eternity is through the Bifrost. And with this new dialogue, I'm hoping to convey that Zeus is genuinely trying to do what he thinks is right, which is protecting the gods, showing that he's not a complete asshole and that the theatrics are to keep everyone calm. Back to the film, Zeus puts Thor's clothes back on and Thor calls him a coward and that he won't stand by and let Gore keep killing gods. This angers Zeus and he tells Thor that he can't let him leave since he knows where the city is. The same fight breaks out, Korg is almost killed, but instead of Thor catching Zeus's lightning bolts, I'll have Zeus use the bolts to knock everyone out. I'll then have them all wake up in a cell with their weapons taken. Thor tries to call his axe but is unable to do so since there's a magical barrier around the cell. They're gods, I'm sure they could do this. Thor looks at his team where he sees Jane has reverted back to her weakened self since she doesn't have the hammer. He goes over to try and comfort her and he asks her what's wrong. And this is where she tells him she has stage 4 cancer. And here I'll reincorporate a lot of the dialogue from the scene when they're on their way to the Shadow Realm. I'll then have Korg, who's just a face being held by Valkyrie, ask what the plan is. Thor says there's not much they can currently do and Gore is likely to continue killing the gods. And I'll have Valkyrie say something like, "That's not such a bad thing." Thor asks what she means and she writes it off as a bad joke, but tells Thor that Gore isn't completely wrong, many of the gods are terrible. Thor agrees with that, but says Gore is taking it too far and he tells them about eternity, explaining to Jane and us the whole wish thing. And I'll have Thor say that gods are not able to make a wish through eternity, explain why none of them have tried to do it. I'll also have Thor tell them that his axe is a key, but you had to be in Omnipotent City to open it. Valkyrie then has a light bulb moment, and she tells him that she thought she noticed Gore wasn't as aggressive last time they fought. This makes her realize that Gore wasn't trying to kill Thor, because if he did, he wouldn't be able to use the axe to get to eternity. Basically, I'm making it so that if Thor is killed, his axe becomes useless, which Gore found out when he touched Thor and got the visions. Now, is that, along with only being able to open the gates in Omnipotent City, actually how it works in MCU and comics? Probably not, but it is now so that everything else makes sense. They then realized that everything up to that point has been a trap. I thought it'd be cool and help explain a lot of things if I made Gore super calculative and manipulative. I think I said those words right. He retreated from New Asgard not because he couldn't defeat them, but because he came up with a new plan since he now knows he can use Thor's axe to get to eternity. And he told them he'd be back to force them to go after him. Then when they're fighting on Nor, he tells them that not even a god's army could defeat him to put that idea in their heads so that they go to Omnipotent City. But why does he do all this? Well, his powers utilize his shadows, so it makes sense if he could, say, hide in someone's shadow, like Thor's shadow. Dun dun dun. Yup, killing two birds with one stone, Gore used them to get to Omnipotent City and have access to a key to eternity. The group all realize this and beg the guards to let them out, but they ignore them. We then go to a heavily guarded, massive room full of shells where Zeus places their weapons. On one of the shells next to all types of other weapons, except for the hammer because it's still on the stage because no one was worthy to pick it up. Once Zeus leaves the room, Gore appears through the shadows and attacks the guards. Back to the cell, the group hear a commotion and see Nini Noni taking out the guards. He then frees them, and because he's a god, he's able to give Korg his body back. Noni definitely did not like Zeus destroying Korg's body, which is why he frees them. Thor attempts to call his axe again, but still can't. He realizes Gore must already be using it, and Thor asks Noni where their weapons are. He motions for them to follow him, and Jane gets up to join them, but Thor begs her not to. She says she can help, and Thor tells her that if she uses the hammer one more time, it could kill her. And we incorporate here the dialogue from when they're in the hospital. He tells her to wait for them here, and she reluctantly agrees. He asks Korg to protect her, kisses Jane, and he and Valkyrie follow Noni. They get to the weapons room and see the bodies of the guards, and that Gore is trying to open the gate. Gore summons his shadow monsters, the three of them grab weapons from the shelves, and we basically get the same fight at the end of the film, though instead it's Valkyrie and Noni fighting off the shadow monsters instead of the kids. Thor will still fight Gore, but will also try to talk him out of it, telling him that many of the plans where we killed their gods are now in complete disarray. At one point, I'll have Valkyrie fight Gore, and while they're fighting, I want to reincorporate the dialogue of when she's tied up and Gore mocks her about how the gods abandoned her. Though here he isn't mocking her, he's genuinely trying to get her to join him. He tells her they've both been failed by the gods, and he specifically went to Nor so that she could see the good that comes out of killing them, and she should join him. Bringing up her past makes Valkyrie teary, and I'll have her say something along the lines of, yes, the gods are shitty, but you went too far. I'm not good at writing dialogue, okay? She attacks him and he stabs her. We then see Noni getting overwhelmed by the monsters and Thor getting his ass kicked. We go back to the cell, and once again the hammer shows itself to Jane, and she once again enters into the battle. And everything will pretty much play out the same. The Necrosword is destroyed, though this time Thor has to use all his strength to free his axe, and collapses on the ground, too physically exhausted to keep fighting. Unfortunately though, he did it just too late, and Gore enters into the gate. And because they're close enough, Thor and Jane teleports with him. Unable to physically stop him, Thor once again tries to talk Gore out of it, telling him there are other ways to bring peace, that death won't solve anything, but love can. He then tells Gore he could bring his daughter back. Unable to do anything else, he calls over to Jane to what could potentially be his final moments. Fortunately, Gore chooses love, and the film plays out the same from here, except for the end credit scene with Zeus. Instead of being mad at Thor for shooting him, he's mad at him for making him look like a fool and a coward. Phew, that's how I changed Thor: Love and Thunder. And honestly, I'm not the happiest with my changes. I tried to make it feel less contrived to give more focus to the main storyline and characters, but it still feels very contrived to me, and there's a lot of telling, which I don't like. I didn't have much of a choice though, since I had to keep the Omnipotent City and Eternal storyline, and I wanted to explain a lot of this element since so much was poorly explained in the story. I also did try to make the characters a little bit more dynamic, and I hope that came across. We now see both good and bad consequences of Gore's actions, and Zeus isn't as complete of an asshole, though still mostly is. I did add a lot more with Valkyrie since I like the idea of comparing her to Gore since they've both been burned by the gods, and there was a little bit there in the original story, so I just emphasized that more. And I tried to give Jane a little bit more by emphasizing her not wanting to feel useless and weak. But there you have it. I'd love to hear your feedback on my thoughts and changes, whether it be positive or negative.
Though please be nice either way.
See you next week. Goodbye. Oh.